The command ship exists in a category of naval vessel that does not fit cleanly into the public imagination of what a warship is. It is not a carrier. It does not project power through aircraft or missiles in the way that the fleet's most visible assets do. It is, in the most operationally precise description, the brain of a naval task force, the platform from which a fleet commander coordinates the movements, the engagement authorities, the logistics, and the strategic communication of every asset operating under his command. Its combat systems are less heavily armed than a destroyer's. Its speed is modest. Its defensive architecture is real, but not the layered multi-ring air defense configuration that a guided missile destroyer carries. What it has, in place of the weapons inventory of a combatant, is the command and control infrastructure, the communication suites, the joint command display systems, the satellite links, the planning facilities, the staff spaces. That makes the difference between a fleet that operates as a coordinated instrument of national power and a fleet that operates as a collection of capable but disconnected units. The loss of a command ship is not equivalent to the loss of a destroyer. It is categorically worse. A destroyed destroyer removes one combatant from the order of battle. A destroyed or mission-killed command ship removes the coordination architecture that makes the remaining combatants effective as a fleet. The IRGCN's operational planners had reached this conclusion through their analysis of U.S. naval operations, and had decided that the most disruptive single strike they could execute against a task force, more disruptive than the destruction of any individual combatant, was the elimination of the command ship around which the task force was organized. The task force had assembled in the northern Persian Gulf 3 days before the engagement. A command ship at the center of the formation, its distinctive superstructure and antenna arrays marking it unmistakably as a command and control platform. 2 guided missile destroyers on the northern arc. 1 frigate to the south. The formation was not a combat patrol configuration. It was a command presence, a statement that U.S. naval authority in this body of water extended to the level of fleet command, not merely patrol operations. The formation had been at anchor for 2 days in a position that placed it within communication range of a diplomatic process that the commander was supporting with his visible presence. The IRGCN had observed the formation continuously from the moment it arrived. Not covertly. The Iranian coastal radar network tracked every vessel in the Gulf as a matter of operational routine, and the command ship's distinctive signature had been logged, analyzed, and flagged in the IRGCN's targeting database within hours of its arrival. The 2 days of anchor position had given the IRGCN's planning element sufficient time to build the engagement architecture that the command ship's presence demanded. The architecture they built was specifically designed around the formation's geometry and around the one tactical assumption that previous engagements had established as reliable: that when a threat appeared, the destroyers would engage it. The destroyers were the formation's combat power. They would respond to an attack with their weapons. And while they were responding, while their fire control systems were committed to the inbound threats, while their TAOs were managing engagement sequences and interceptor allocations, their attention and their weapons capacity would be directed outward, away from the center of the formation, away from the command ship. The attack opened at 3:14 a.m. from the northwest. 23 loitering munitions, their launch positions distributed across a 15 nautical mile stretch of Iranian coastline, their approach bearing placing them on a direct track toward the formation's northern arc, not toward the command ship, toward the 2 destroyers on the northern sector. The destroyers responded immediately. Both ships' combat systems acquired the inbound contacts within seconds of first detection, their Aegis systems building fire control solutions, and their TAOs initiating engagement authorization sequences. This was the engagement that the destroyers' training and equipment had prepared them for. A mass drone swarm from a coastal bearing, approaching at altitudes consistent with sea-skimming loitering munitions, closing at speeds that place the leading contacts at impact range in approximately 18 minutes. The engagement would require both destroyers' full attention and a significant fraction of their interceptor inventories across a layered defensive sequence. This was also the engagement the IRGCN had designed them to be fighting. At 3:17 a.m., 3 minutes after the northern engagement began, while both destroyers' fire control systems were committed to the engagement sequence. The formation's southern sector produced a different picture, not from the south. From beneath the surface of the formation's anchor position, 3 autonomous underwater gliders, not torpedoes, not the propulsion-driven weapons of a conventional submarine attack, but long-duration autonomous platforms that had been pre-positioned in the anchor area 2 days before the formation arrived, operating at depth on passive drift profiles that minimized their acoustic signature and kept them invisible to the formation's passive sonar monitoring. They had been placed there by an IRGCN maritime special operations element that had conducted what appeared on surface radar to be routine fishing operations in the area 3 days before the formation's arrival. The gliders had been deployed from beneath the surface of the fishing vessels at night, set on their programmed drift profiles and left to wait. The gliders were not weapons delivery systems. They were not carrying warheads. What they were carrying was a different kind of payload, a communications relay and a targeting sensor package designed to provide an over-the-horizon data link to the 8 fast attack craft that had been holding south of the formation at a range of 21 nautical miles, outside the formation's primary radar coverage, waiting for the data that the gliders' positioning sensors would provide. At 3:17 a.m., the gliders activated their surface communication burst and transmitted the command ship's precise position, course, and speed, measured directly from the glider's own GPS receivers at ranges of less than 500 meters from the anchored vessel, to the fast attack craft holding to the south. The transmission lasted 4 seconds. The gliders then returned to passive drift mode. The fast attack craft received the position update and accelerated to maximum speed, 21 nautical miles at 42 knots, approximately 30 minutes to the formation's position. Their approach from the south was not the direct bearing that would have placed them in the primary radar coverage of the formation's southern frigate. They had been positioned at an azimuth offset that placed their initial approach behind the shallow water terrain feature of a small coastal shoal that generated consistent radar clutter on the frigate's surface search picture. They had been in that position for 9 hours. They had been waiting. The frigate's radar operator had been monitoring the northern engagement on the tactical data link, watching the destroyer's engagement picture as the loitering munition swarm was being addressed. The northern engagement was dramatic in the radar sense. 23 contacts, multiple simultaneous intercept solutions. The track picture updating rapidly as contacts were eliminated and new contacts were classified. It was the dominant feature of the formation's tactical picture. The surface clutter patch to the south, where the coastal shoal generated its familiar ambient return, had nothing unusual to report. At 3:21 a.m., one of the returns in the southern clutter patch began to move, then another, then 4 more, then all 8, their acceleration carrying them out of the clutter patch's coverage in a period of approximately 40 seconds, as their speed built from the slow drift, consistent with the shoal's current, to the 42 knots of maximum military power. The radar operator identified the acceleration at 3:21 a.m. and 33 seconds, and called the contacts to his TAO. 8 fast contacts bearing 192 degrees from the formation, range 19 nautical miles inbound. The frigate's TAO made the call that the situation required and transmitted it to the formation on the tactical data link simultaneously. Southern threat, 8 surface contacts, bearing 192, range 19 nautical miles, fast attack profile. The formation's response to the southern surface threat was constrained by the engagement that was already running on the northern arc. The destroyers were committed, their fire control channels, their interceptor allocations, their TAOs. Attention to the loitering munition engagement that had been in progress for 7 minutes and had not yet fully resolved. The northern swarm still had 11 contacts airborne. The destroyers could not cleanly redirect their weapons to the southern surface threat without compromising the engagement that was in progress against the contacts that were already inside the outer ring envelope. The formation commander, in the command ship, reviewed the composite picture and made the assessment that the tactical data link was presenting him. 2 simultaneous threat axes, different threat types, the northern axis engaging the formation's combat power, and the southern axis accelerating toward the command ship's position, with no escort weapon system, in an optimal position to address it. He ordered the command ship to weigh anchor and get underway. Weighing anchor in a tactical emergency is not an instantaneous evolution. The anchor chain must be recovered. The windlass motor drawing the chain aboard at its maximum rate, which for the command ship's anchor configuration required approximately 4 minutes to recover the full scope of chain that had been deployed at the anchor position. The ship could not maneuver at speed until the anchor was fully aboard. It could not take the anchor aboard faster than the windlass motor's mechanical capability permitted. 4 minutes was the minimum. 4 minutes was what the geometry provided. The command ship's own defensive systems were not idle during those 4 minutes. The ship carried a CIWS system on its forward sponson and a shorter range point defense system on the aft deck, and both were placed in automatic engagement mode as the anchor recovery began. The ship also had a 25mm deck mount on the bridge wing that the watch team was training on the southern bearing, as the fast attack contacts closed from 19 nautical miles to 14 to 11. At 3:23 a.m., the frigate's 5-inch gun opened fire on the leading fast attack contacts. At 11 nautical miles, the ballistic fire control solution was at the outer limit of the 5-inch gun's effective surface engagement range, and the accuracy at that range against a 42-knot maneuvering target was limited. The rounds were falling in the general area of the lead contact rather than achieving direct hits. But the splash patterns of the 5-inch rounds in the water ahead of and around the lead contacts had the effect that suppressive fire at long range often achieves. 2 of the 8 contacts broke their approach bearing, turning east in a course change that placed them on a wider track around the frigate's position, rather than a direct approach to the command ship. 6 contacts continued. The anchor recovery completed at 3:24 a.m. and 40 seconds. The command ship was underway, its propulsion plant pushing the ship to its maximum sustainable speed, 18 knots, on a course that angled to the southeast, opening range from the approaching fast attack contacts, while simultaneously moving the ship toward deeper water, where its keel clearance would be less constrained. 18 knots was not the speed of a destroyer. It was the speed of a command ship with a full staff complement and the antenna arrays and communication suites that justified its existence, and it was the best speed the ship could produce. The 6 continuing fast attack contacts were at 8 nautical miles when the command ship got underway. At 42 knots approach speed and 18 knots opening speed, the closure rate was 24 knots. The contacts closing 1 nautical mile every 2.5 minutes. At that closure rate, they would reach the command ship's position in approximately 20 minutes from the moment the ship got underway, 20 minutes for the destroyers to finish the northern engagement and redirect to the southern surface threat. The northern engagement had been running for 12 minutes. It had 8 contacts remaining. At the current engagement rate, the destroyers would clear the northern picture in approximately 6 more minutes. 6 minutes of northern engagement remaining, then redirect south. The 6 fast attack contacts were at 6 nautical miles when the first destroyer announced northern picture clear at 3:28 a.m. and called for engagement authorization against the southern contacts. The authorization came from the formation commander in the command ship within 3 seconds. The destroyer's 5-inch gun was already in surface engagement mode. It opened fire at 6 nautical miles against the leading fast attack contacts, while the surface-to-surface fire control solution built. 2 contacts were stopped by 5-inch gunfire at ranges between 5.4 and 4.8 nautical miles from the destroyer. The gun's accuracy at those ranges against maneuvering targets was better than the frigate's had been at 11 miles, and 2 of the 6 contacts took hits that reduced their speed to levels consistent with hull damage causing flooding. They fell behind the remaining formation and eventually stopped, their crews apparently beginning damage control procedures. 4 contacts remaining, 3.2 nautical miles from the command ship. The command ship's forward CIWS acquired the leading contact and engaged at 2.1 nautical miles. Contact eliminated. Second contact at 1.7 nautical miles. CIWS engagement, contact eliminated. Third contact at 1.3 nautical miles. Support IRGCN Trice. IYS engaged, but the burst required 2 corrections as the contact executed a hard turn that moved it off the engagement axis before the second burst connected at 980 meters. 980 meters from the command ship's hull. The 4th contact, the last of the 6, was on a bearing that placed it approaching from the command ship's port quarter, outside the forward CIWS mount's optimal engagement arc. The point defense system on the aft deck had been tracking it and engaged at 1.4 nautical miles. The system's lighter weapon produced a higher rate of fire than the CIWS, more rounds in a shorter burst, and the contact was struck at approximately 1.1 nautical miles. Its hull lost structural integrity. Its momentum carried it forward for approximately 200 meters before the flooding overcame the engine thrust and the craft stopped. Its bow section low in the water, its forward progress arrested. The radar picture was clear of active threats at 3:31 a.m. and 14 seconds. The command ship had sustained no hull impacts. The two damaged fast attack contacts that had been stopped by the destroyer's gunfire were stationary in the water, their crews visible on the infrared cameras as thermal signatures moving around the decks of partially flooded craft. They were within Iranian coastal waters in terms of their eventual drift direction, but were currently in international water, a jurisdictional and humanitarian situation that the formation commander would need to address in the post-engagement period. The four contacts that had been eliminated by the CIWS and point defense systems were debris fields on the surface. Wreckage scattered across the approach corridor that the command ship's wake was now passing through as the ship continued its evasive course at maximum speed, not yet having received the order to reduce speed and assess its position. At 3:33 a.m., the formation commander ordered all ships to hold current positions and conduct damage assessment. The command ship reduced speed and the officer of the deck began the navigational assessment that determined the ship's current position relative to the anchor area it had departed 8 minutes earlier. The position was workable. The ship had opened approximately 4 nautical miles from the anchor position on its evasive course, and was in water of sufficient depth to safely anchor again if the tactical situation permitted. The weapons expenditure for the engagement was distributed across multiple platforms and weapon types. The two destroyers had expended interceptors against the 23 loitering munitions of the Northern Swarm, 16 SM-2 interceptors, 8 ESSM interceptors, and approximately 6,000 rounds of 20mm CIWS between both ships. The frigate had expended approximately 40 rounds of 5-inch in its long-range surface engagement. The second destroyer had expended approximately 30 rounds of 5-inch in its closer-range surface engagement. The command ship had expended approximately 4,000 rounds of CIWS, 20mm, and approximately 600 rounds from the point defense system. Total interceptor cost for the air defense engagement against the Northern Swarm: approximately $28 million. Before the post-engagement analysis was transmitted, the commanding officer of the command ship spent 20 minutes in the ship's operations center, reviewing the engagement timeline with his operations officer. They worked through the sequence minute by minute, the tactical data link recordings providing a precise reconstruction of every contact, every engagement, every decision that had been made across the 5 platforms involved in the defense. The review was not comfortable. What it showed was a formation that had successfully defended itself against a 31 contact coordinated attack and had done so without a hull strike. That was the outcome that mattered, and it was a good outcome. What it also showed was a command ship that had spent approximately 11 minutes of the engagement in a position where its own defensive systems were its primary protection, where the destroyer's weapons were committed to the northern engagement and could not be redirected to the southern surface threat until the northern picture cleared, and where the frigate's 5-inch engagement had been at ranges that produced suppression rather than elimination. 11 minutes, during which the command ship's CIWS and point defense system and deck gun had been the answer to 8 fast attack boats that had planned their approach specifically to exploit the window that the Northern Swarm was designed to create. The formation commander's review of those 11 minutes was the operational basis for the adjusted defensive posture that he ordered for all subsequent anchor periods in the Gulf. The adjustment was not an admission that the attack had succeeded. It had not. It was the application of the specific, irreducible lesson that only an actual engagement can teach. The gap in the defensive architecture that the planning process had not fully quantified, now precisely measured in nautical miles and minutes by the engagement that had exploited it. 11 minutes. 8 nautical miles of approach before the destroyers could redirect. The numbers were now in the operational record, where they would inform planning decisions for every subsequent command presence operation in the Gulf region. The post-engagement analysis identified the glider-based targeting relay as the operationally significant element of the attack, not because it had been technically exotic, but because it had provided targeting data that the IRGCN surface and airborne collection architecture could not have produced cleanly from outside the formation's radar coverage. The gliders had been inside the formation. They had measured the command ship's position directly, at ranges that eliminated the position uncertainty that long-range sensor collection always introduces. The 4-second data burst they had transmitted had given the fast attack craft a targeting solution of precision that their own sensors, approaching from 21 nautical miles against a moving target, could not have provided independently. The operation had not succeeded in reaching the command ship's hull, but it had achieved the secondary objective that its planners had designed into the operation: the anchor recovery, the emergency sortie, the commitment of 2 destroyers to a northern engagement that prevented their immediate redirect to the southern surface threat. All of these had been produced by an attack that had not landed a single round on an American hull. The command ship had moved, had broken its anchor position, had disrupted the diplomatic support mission it had been conducting, had consumed the formation's attention and a significant fraction of the destroyer's interceptor inventory. The IRGCN had not sunk a ship. They had moved one. In the operational context of a command presence conducting diplomatic support, moving the command ship was a strategic outcome, a demonstration that the ship's presence in the anchor position was not permanent, not unconditional, not immune to the pressure that an adversary with sufficient planning patience could apply. The formation returned to anchor position the following afternoon. The diplomatic mission continued. The naval presence was maintained. The anchor position was the same position. But the intelligence architecture around the formation's defensive picture had been updated to include the underwater glider threat category. The formation's sonar watch posture had been adjusted, and the patrol perimeter for the formation's helicopter had been extended south to provide earlier surface contact detection in the approach corridors that the fast attack craft had used. The presence continued, on adjusted terms. That was the only kind of presence the Gulf offered, the kind that adapted, that incorporated what had happened and planned for what would happen, that held its position not through invulnerability, but through the willingness to be tested and to answer the test with the resources and the training and the professional judgment that kept the flag flying in water, that tested everything. The anchor held. The watch continued. The Gulf waited for the next test, as it always had.